Everyone knows these Toyota Tacomas are legendary in terms of reliability, so today I want to go for a little drive and talk about what to expect from one with over 200,000 miles on it. So this is a 2006 Toyota Tacoma SR5 model, and it has the 4-liter 1GR V6 engine in it. You could also get these with a 2.7-liter 4-cylinder. And this is a 4-wheel drive model, kind of, but we'll get into that more later on in this video. So this is a very popular model of second-generation Tacoma, and I didn't buy this one. I actually kind of adopted it, I guess you could say. See, my wife owned this truck long before I ever met her, and before she got it, this was a work truck. Oddly enough, this was a work truck for, I believe, a printer cartridge sales company, of all things, in the Toronto area. And so they were driving it around and using it for deliveries and stuff. And then she bought it and she used it for her woodworking business. So this is very much a former work truck. Let's do a little mileage check here. As you can see, this truck has 333,000 kilometers on it, which if you do the math is, I think, roughly 205,000 miles. So this is no spring chicken. This thing has some wear and tear on it, and it's been driven quite a bit. So what does a 200,000 mile Tacoma drive like? Well, to be honest, it drives a lot like I would assume a low mileage Tacoma. Overall, this thing rides really smooth. It tracks really straight. The alignment is dead on this thing. There's really no squeaks or rattles to make note of. Aside from this one does have a bit of a clunk from the sway bar bushings, but I knew about that. I just haven't gotten around to replacing them yet. But aside from that, it's very smooth and uneventful. The engine is still pretty healthy as far as I know. I can't really compare it to when it was lower mileage, but it pulls strong enough and it seems to be fairly smooth. The transmission as well, it shifts really smoothly. It holds gears like it's supposed to. It downshifts like it's supposed to. It's a little bit clunky in general, but I'm sure it was like that from the factory. This is just the nature of an old school automatic transmission. And there's no differential whine or anything like that, any noises coming from the axles. It's really just really tight and really quiet. It's a little hard to compare the pull of the engine on this truck when I'm used to my V8 4Runner, because that's just not really a fair comparison. And I drive that truck every day, so of course this one feels a little bit slower to me, but that's to be expected. Now, as with most other Toyota trucks, especially the older ones like this, the biggest killer is rust. And with these Tacomas, that might not be an issue for you. Because if yours is like this one, it had the frame replacement recall done on it, which basically means that Toyota told all the Tacoma owners, hey, if your frame is too rusty on your old truck, whether it's under warranty or not, that's our bad, and we're going to pay to put a brand new frame on your truck and replace everything and basically build your truck all over again on a brand new frame. And that's what happened here. Also, when they had it all apart, they were doing that. They also did a recall on the rear leaf springs, which is I guess it's a common issue on these, that they either get really noisy, they really squeak, or sometimes they just break. If you use it like a truck and you overload your bed, they just weren't very strong, so they upgraded the leaf springs on them, and that was a recall as well. So this one had that done, and based on what I've seen, it looks like the front suspension has been replaced recently as well, and I'm assuming it was probably done when they were chopping everything off of this frame at the Toyota dealership. But yeah, if your truck did not have that recall done and you're getting up to this 200,000 plus mile range, chances are you're going to be dealing with quite a bit of rust. Now, how about the condition of the interior here? I have to say, I think this is probably what I'm most surprised about with this truck and the mileage that it has. This interior is in really good shape. The biggest thing that I notice is that there's no tears on these cloth seats. And there's nothing special about the cloth on these seats. It's the same as you'd see on any old Toyota. And maybe it's just her little bum doesn't put enough weight on it when she's getting in and out of this truck or something, but there's no tears, there's nothing. These seats look like brand new. There's also no real squeaks or rattles in the interior of this truck at all when you're driving either, which again is pretty impressive. I had a Jeep Grand Cherokee that only had about 180,000 kilometers on it, and that thing was making all kinds of little clunks and rattles. So build quality wise, these Tacomas are the real deal. There are some scuffs on the dash and like on the vinyls and stuff in this, but back to it being a work truck, I think that's to be expected because nobody really cares about that kind of stuff when you're loading this thing up with products or equipment. Of course, there's gonna be some things rubbing on the vinyl, and there's nothing we can do about that now. There's no polishing or scrubbing that we can do to fix that, so just gotta live with it. One thing that is worn out though is this driver's side door seal. It's quite stretched out, and we're getting a lot of wind noise in it when you're on the highway especially, so that's something I'm going to have to address for sure. But all the buttons, all the controls and all this stuff all work perfectly fine still. The power windows and everything all work great. One other thing to mention is in the back seat there's like some kind of rubber strips that if you flip the seat down so you have like a mounting platform for cargo and stuff, there's rubber strips on there, and I guess over the years with all the heat from the sun, it melted the adhesive on those, so those are curled up. That's one thing that has worn out on the interior of this truck. I did have to replace a few things on this truck when I first got it. Again, I sort of adopted it. The main thing was the steering wheel was pretty sloppy. I noticed the steering was loose. And coming from my 4Runner, which is the same era, and it's fairly tight, I knew that the play in this steering wheel, something was wrong. And it ended up being the steering shaft, the knuckle on it was worn out, so it needed a new steering shaft, which wasn't that big of a deal, especially considering I was assuming kind of the worst, in that this thing was going to need a new steering rack, which I believe is a pretty common issue on these. And so I was able to avoid that. It wasn't that big of a deal. Another thing we had to replace right off the bat was it basically needed an entirely new exhaust system from front to back. It was completely rotten out. And that's not super uncommon here in Canada, especially in Ontario. Our salty roads, it just eats away at exhaust systems pretty easily. So this needed a new exhaust. Aside from that, it's been mostly like the typical wear and tear stuff that you would have to put on any vehicle that has some miles on it. Stuff like I put a new battery in it, it's needed brakes, tires, the usuals. But nothing really outside of that. Nothing really out of the ordinary. One other thing that I did have to deal with, and it's also common on older vehicles like this of any brand, but more so I think on these older Toyotas, was that the headlights were really cloudy and really yellow. And that's just the UV coating on them wearing off over the years, and so I had to sand that off and polish them, which is no big deal. And that was also included in the detailing video that I did of this truck, so feel free to go and check that one out if you want to. So what's currently wrong with this truck? Well, I gotta be honest, it does have some issues, some outstanding things that are gonna need some attention. I think the biggest one is the four-wheel drive actuator. That's the one that has probably annoyed me the most, just in the time that I've been driving it. And it's not completely broken. It will engage four-wheel drive sometimes, but it's very hit and miss. And it's one of those things where if it doesn't want to engage, none of the typical tricks that you would do to like an electronic four-wheel drive vehicle to make it pop into four-wheel drive are gonna work. They're just, if it doesn't want to go in, it's not going in. And from what I understand, it's a sort of a connection issue in the actuator, some dirty connectors or something. So hopefully I'll be able to pull that apart and clean up those connections and get this thing back to shifting properly again. Because right now it's pretty unpredictable. The other thing that doesn't work is the air conditioning. Everything lights up, but there was a couple times when I turned it on and this AC light was flashing. So I'm gonna assume that that's not just a simple fix like charging up the system or something like that. If it's flashing, it means that the system knows that there's something mechanically wrong with it. So I'm not sure if we're gonna need a new compressor or something. But yeah, the AC doesn't work. So another thing that doesn't work is the blower motor is messed up. And I do believe this is also a common issue on these trucks. A lot of times, sometimes it'll work like normal, but a lot of times you'll have it on off and you go for one of these lower settings, and of course right now it's working, but there'll be nothing. These will all be off. And then as soon as you get to high, it'll go full blast. And then as soon as you drop it down, it'll go back down to nothing again. And I did some reading on that. It seems like that's a pretty common issue as well. Oddly enough, some people believe that it's caused by a clogged cabin air filter, of all things. And because of where the relay is for the blower motor, I guess it's near that, and it causes it to overheat, and it just loses some kind of a connection in there. It burns out a resistor or something, I'm not sure. But hopefully it's common enough that there's an easy fix for it, and I'll be able to deal with that as well. Another issue, we do have a few burnt out bulbs in the dash here. Totally normal. I had a few burnt out in my 4Runner as well, with 100,000 less kilometers on it. Another thing, I'm not sure, it's probably more to do with it just being a former work truck, but this has a few holes in the bed, in the floor of the box. And one of the good things about these Tacomas, at least I think it's a good thing, is that they essentially have a plastic bed. And the good news is that means you don't need to buy a bed liner or have a bed liner sprayed into it. The bad news is it's obviously not quite as robust as a steel one is. So this one has a couple of holes in it, probably from people throwing objects in the back. Now, one thing I will say is this engine has a little bit of a hesitation in it. Actually, that wasn't too bad, but it does have a bit of a cough at higher RPMs if you're really getting on it. At lower RPMs, or if you're just driving like normal, it pulls fairly smooth. But it's when you really get on it, it just kind of coughs a little. It's just a bit of a hesitation. And so I'm assuming that it probably just needs a tune-up. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing is still on the original spark plugs. I can't imagine this thing was that cared for in terms of maintenance, just because it was a little bit beat up when I got it. So I'm going to hope that I can just do a tune-up on it, and that's going to clear that up. It's probably just some fouled plugs, but time will tell if that's going to be the fix or not. And the only other thing, as you can see, you've probably been staring at it throughout this whole video, we do have a TPMS light on in the dash. And that's not a malfunction in the system of the truck at all. That's just simply because of the fact that there aren't any sensors in these wheels and tires. That's all there is to it. Brakes work great on this truck too. Especially considering that Toyota is still putting drum brakes on the back of these things. That just blows my mind sometimes, but oh well. So are these little Tacomas really as reliable and tough as people say they are? In my experience, I think I'm going to have to say yes. I might have a few little quirks here and there that might need addressing from time to time, but it's always going to start and run every morning for you. It's going to get you where you want to go, and you can really trust it. Even an example like this that, to be honest, was probably a little bit neglected and a little bit beat up before I got it. And it still is holding up well, and once I put a little time and money into fixing some stuff, it's right back to being rock solid again. So if this truck can do that, I feel like any truck can. Take your time, buddy. I think as long as you stay on top of your maintenance, and as long as it doesn't rust, and that's a big one too. Rust, that's the main thing that'll kill one of these trucks. If you can avoid that, if you can keep it clean, keep the underbody clean, then I don't see any reason why one of these trucks won't last you at least 500,000 miles. If you want to see what this truck looked like when I first got it, before I did some body work and replaced some panels and swapped the wheels and all that kind of stuff, go ahead and check out this video on the screen, and that'll be the start of the playlist that I have of this, of restoring this Tacoma. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't do it. Don't do it. Wow. Okay. knew you were going to do it.